morning. Man, it is good to see all of you. My name is Chris McKenna, and Andrea and I have been coming to Cornerstone for a really long time, and some of you have too. And I've had different roles over the years, volunteer with middle school, crazy time. Anybody love middle schoolers? I love junior high. It's a whole different breed of human, I know. I've worked with high schoolers and stepped away for a little while. I was on staff for a little while, but now I have the chance to come back and to lead the confirmation process, which has just been an unbelievable journey with these students. Now, if you've been with us for the last couple of weeks here at Cornerstone, we've been in the book of Mark. And today actually marks the longest series, the record. We're tied our record for the longest amount of time that we have spent in a message series. So come back next week. Guinness will be here. It'll be a part of something really special. We'll break that record as we're cruising through the Gospel of Mark in a really special way. And if you were here last week, either in person or online, you had a treat. It was a jam-packed morning. We had both of the sacraments. We had a pool here at the 11 o'clock. There was a splash zone of baptism going on all around the pool. We celebrated. Tommy led us through an action-packed chapter 8 in the Gospel of Mark, where we see Jesus doing all kinds, healing and blessing, right? We celebrated communion together and just all of this happening. And chapter 8 in Mark is really exemplary of what we see throughout this gospel. We see Jesus doing all kinds of things chapter after chapter, right? A miraculous feast, blindness healed, Peter getting it, and then in typical Peter fashion, Peter not getting it, right? We see crazy talk of death and resurrection, Jesus telling Peter, "Get behind me, Satan," just another typical week in the book of Mark. And I hope you had a chance to spend some time in it this week. And Tommy challenged us to be all in, didn't he? To pick up our cross and to follow Jesus fully. And maybe you read through chapter 8 this week. We're inviting all of you as we explore each of these chapters to then the week after to go through it verse by verse. And there's all kinds of verses in Mark that's maybe you pull out your highlighter and you go, wow, I like that one. Or maybe you put it away because you don't like that one, right? Whatever it might be. But there's one of these, what I call gut verses in Mark chapter 8, meaning it really punches you in the gut and it leaves a little bit of a mark in Mark, and it's this, in Mark 8:36, it says, "What good is it for a man to gain the whole world and yet forfeit his soul?" Man, in a world of me and mine and now, this is tough stuff. I'm glad you came back. I'm so glad you did after a verse like that, because throughout this series, friends, the Gospel of Mark invites us to ask and to wrestle with a really big, important question. Who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? If you're taking notes or you grabbed a bulletin on your way in, write that question down. Maybe you've been a believer for a long time. You're like, Chris, I know the answer to that question. Good. I bet there's another depth to it. Who is Jesus? And today, chapter 9, from the very beginning, this chapter is going to explore that question in more detail. Now, it's true that all four of the Gospels focus on Jesus, but they do in pretty different ways. And the Gospel of Mark has a unique way of helping us explore this question. I mean, the entire Bible is all about Jesus. You've got the Old Testament pointing toward him coming. You've got the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John saying, he's here. Pay attention, I'm here. And then you've got the rest of the New Testament saying, don't forget. Don't forget the cross. Don't forget the resurrection. But Mark helps us explore this question in a unique way. If you were to look online to say what's different about Mark, I looked at Evidence for Christianity. It's a website, and it says this. It says the uniqueness of Mark is its sense of drama. You know, as a former middle school pastor, I get drama, okay? Its sense of drama. Jesus is always on the move in his ministry toward Jerusalem and his death, something Tommy really, dove into last week, this idea of death and resurrection. In Mark, Jesus is a man of action. We move quickly from one scene to another. Jesus heals many. He's a man on purpose. Of the four Gospels, Mark is written in the simplest Greek. It's the shortest of the Gospels, and most scholars agree that it was the first to be written, perhaps as early as the 50s or even the 40s AD. So maybe within a decade of that cross and that resurrection. Now, maybe you've been here the whole time for the whole 8 weeks. I'll admit in a moment of confession, I have not. But if you look at Mark and the things that it invites us to do week after week, these are some of the things that you would see present in all of the chapters. Number one, you would see a very human portrait of Jesus. Now, I don't understand all of this, fully God, fully human. This is one of these mysteries I sort of put in this open hand. I'm like, I don't quite get it. I love it. I love that he was human with us. I love that he was fully God to show us what it could look like with heaven as our destination, to embrace the divine side of him. I don't understand that fully, but we see that chapter after chapter. Number two, we see the failure of the disciples. My gosh, they're just like us. Number three, a focus on the cross. Eyes on the cross. Really from chapter 8, where Tommy had us last week, until the end here, we're gonna see focus after focus on the cross. And not just the cross, but that glorious resurrection. And then the fourth thing we see in Mark is that Jesus is a man of action and authority. We see him from the start, feeding, healing, walking, sending. You can't keep him down. And that was chapter 8. And Peter even gets the question right, that core Mark question of who is Jesus. Peter actually gets it right. In Mark 8:29, he answers the question. Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" And he says, "You are the Christ." And then 4 verses later, he messes it up. Right? Literally 4 verses later, 8:34, yeah, I can just see it. Can't you just picture it? Where Jesus is, talking about death and resurrection, and Peter says to him, "Hey, you don't know what you're talking about," basically. And I can just see Jesus kind of going, "All right, I'll let you finish. Remember, I'm God, but I'll let you finish," right? Right? So this is that moment of failure of the disciples. And my gosh, Peter is up and down all over the place, just like us, right? As a leader of students, just like us, where Monday's great, Tuesday sucks, Wednesday's great again, right? So I hope you can see yourself in these chapters. I hope you can see yourself. Peter is all of us, and at least we're in good company. Does your life have some ups and downs? That's okay. Peter turned out okay. In chapter 9 is more of the same. We're going to see a Jesus full of action and authority. His disciples are going to fail miserably. Jesus gets cranky and compassionate. It's a human side of him, right? And he hints that all of this is pointing at the cross. And we have 2 stories we're going to focus on. Usually we've only focused on one, but today we're going to focus on 2 stories that really pull together a really core idea that I want to explore with you today, really to push each of us to wrestle with that core question of who is Jesus? Now, I don't know if any of you were, but in high school, I was not a wrestler. In my high school, little old Bath High School, north of Lansing there, wrestlers were a different breed of teen boy. They were tough, they were gritty, and they had a little bit of meanness in them. And I'm none of those things, especially the tough and the gritty part. I mean, look at me. These legs were good for running, that's it. That's all I've got, okay? But I was at my parents' house last week. My parents live down on Algonquin Lake in Hastings. Some of you know where that is. And me and Andrea and the 4 kids, we were down there hanging out, having some good pizza. And their neighbor came over. And Andy is the neighbor. Just an awesome guy. I love hanging out with Andy. Just gregarious. You can't help but just feel energized after hanging out with Andy. And so Andy and his family came over. Their son is the same age as our sons. We love hanging out with them. Did you have a spot in the summertime where you had like lake friends? Like something like that? I know that I did. That's sort of what this family is. And Andy was a wrestler. And so we were talking about wrestling because in Hastings, there's not a lot to talk about. And so it was in the news. And so we were talking about wrestling because that was in the news. And Andy told me something I didn't know. He said that in wrestling, nothing is off limits. Nothing. He referred to all kinds of nasty pokes and holds and pinches that you just do in wrestling, that nothing is off limits. And I'm going, thank goodness I was in cross country. Like that was... But he's telling me all these things. And maybe if you're a wrestler, you know what I'm talking about. That nothing was off limits as long as you didn't get caught. Now, I think that's what I'm asking of you today. And not the pokes and the pinches, especially if you don't know the person next to you. That would be weird. But what I'm asking you today is to ask yourself, is there anything about me that's off limits? Is there anything about my heart that is off limits to God? All right, I want to jump into Mark chapter 9. That's where we're going today. Now, maybe you've got a Bible with you, maybe you've got it on your phone, or maybe you need to grab one of these blue guys from the seat in front of you. If that's true and you don't have a Bible, take it. We don't need churches full of Bibles, we need homes full of Bibles. And so if you need one, I want you to take this home. And I might get in trouble for saying that, but I just did. But if you're in the blue Bible that we've got here at Cornerstone, you're going to be going to page 714. This isn't like a Bible drill where you got to find it fast. I'll give you the page number. We're going to go to page 714 or turn to it there in your app, whatever you've got. And we're going to look at a story that I'm sure many of us know. It's going to be also on the screen here so you can read along. Mark chapter 9, starting in verse 2. It says this: after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. There he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." For he did not know what to say. They were so frightened. Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud. "This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. This story is known as the transfiguration of Jesus. Say that word after me, transfiguration. It's a lot of syllables, isn't it? My youngest son, Blake, he's in this phase of, well, he is smarter than I am already. I have no way of leading this child anymore. He is just one of those really brilliant kids, and he loves quizzing me on words in the English language that either have the most letters or the most syllables, and he crushes me all the time, right? Transfiguration, that's one of these big words. Now, for nature people out there, think of caterpillar turning into beautiful butterfly. Little Disney moment there for some of my fans out there, right? For movie people, think Transformers, a complete change. Jesus is literally going through this physical metamorphosis to reveal to his core group who he really is. Now, if you do a simple Google search on like what is the purpose of the transfiguration, you'll typically find an answer that looks like this. It says that given what the disciples were now hearing from Jesus, death and resurrection, he really wanted to make sure that they understood what he was all about. Because those words, that idea, the one who was supposed to save them from rule, the idea that there would be death involved was totally unsettling to them. And so he wanted to make sure at least his core group understood who he really was. That he wasn't just a really amazing human. He was God who just happened to be walking around like a really amazing human. In other words, this is the moment where the disciples are being challenged to not just believe things about Jesus, but to actually begin to believe in Jesus. 2 simple words that make all of the difference. Prepositions, right? If you remember English. I had an amazing English. For students in here, that's language arts. We used to call it English because that's what it is, okay? I had an amazing middle school English teacher. Her name was Mrs. Soul. We're still Facebook friends. We comment on each other's stuff 34 years later. I love it. Mrs. Soul, she just had this way of seeing into you and knowing you. It was unbelievable. I remember we took this really simple sort of gifts test. Sometimes you take those so you can kind of figure out what you want to study and later on. And I took this gifts test in 8th grade. I kid you not. And I had done with this test. And she wrote at the top in the upper right-hand corner of my test, accountant. 14, and she saw a nerdy side of me that liked Excel spreadsheets early on, and called that out in me. There was something about Mrs. Soul. But the thing about her that she also did is she made us memorize things. Did you have a teacher that made you memorize things? I had to memorize helping verbs. Am, is, are, was, were, being, been, have, has, had, do, does, is, shall, could, can, could, may, might, must, seem, appear, become. It's like a tattoo on my brain. I don't know what I had for breakfast yesterday, but I got helping verbs nailed. Prepositions were the same way, right? In, on, into, over, under, to, at, by, for, from, of, off, up, down, near, past, outside, inside, around, about, against, and on, and on. And on is a preposition, right? We had to memorize these. Simple words that connect our language together. But not only that, friends, this morning, simple words that connect our faith to Jesus. See, most of Americans believe a lot of things about Jesus, don't they? They might even believe things about the story that I just read. We can believe things about his death and resurrection. But let me show you this. Satan believes a lot of things about Jesus. For me, one of the most unsettling verses in the Bible is James 2:19. You're going to see it on the screen. James says, you believe that there is one God, good. Even the demons believe that, and they shudder. Belief about Jesus is not the same as belief in Jesus. A simple preposition that makes all the difference. And friends, if you are waiting for a mountaintop transfiguration moment to move from about to in, that's not always how God works. And I would caution you and say, be careful what you ask for. Because if your in is based on an experience, that's a pretty shaky faith. Oswald Chambers is a devotional that I love and use from time to time. And he says this about that kind of faith. He says, if your faith is in experiences, anything that happens is likely to upset that faith. The ups and downs will upset that faith. The Peter moments will pull you away. So do you believe things about Jesus, or do you believe in Jesus? Now, maybe you're asking, okay, Chris, what does believing in look like? I'm so glad you asked. I can tell you that believing in Jesus is not the absence of doubt. Right? This is where my left brain messes with me because it's all about quantity and numbers and things that you can measure. And maybe some of you are the same way, where we get caught up in this trap where I've got to have enough. I've got to have enough prayer. I've got to have enough goodness. I've got to have enough purity. I've got to have enough knowledge. We get this idea that there's a minimum quantity, some amount that we have to get to. And I want to tell you, friends, it is just simply not true. I want to show it to you because as Jesus is coming down the mountain, there's this ruckus going on. The crowds have gathered, the disciples have left behind, the ones that are there, the three that he didn't, he took three, he left some there, and they're trying to heal somebody, and they're failing miserably. A desperate man whose son is demon-possessed sees Jesus and thinks, maybe he can help. And this is where we pick up that story. In Mark 9:18, it says this. The father, he's the one speaking here. He says, I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. You unbelieving generation, Jesus replied, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. Have you seen the emoji, like the facepalm emoji? I feel like if emojis were around, this is what Jesus would have texted those 9 this. He'd been like, really? Facepalm. The shaking my head, the SMH, right? How many of those moments, if you look at your log, how many SMH moments have each of us had with our Lord, right? I'm sure this is it. I don't think he's like disappointed, right? He's not shaking, like wagging a finger at them. He's just like, we've still got a little distance here, don't we? To get that full in sort of experience that I'm looking for in you guys. I love that response. Again, it just sort of makes the whole thing human, right? It makes the whole thing like us. this failure of the disciples that I think we can all relate to from time to time. And I'm sure as a parent, the other side of this is the father, when you look at his role in the story, and that's a really interesting thing to do sometimes, is like to put yourself in the different roles and to really feel it and experience it. And if you're a parent, you get where this dad is coming from. You've got a sick child, and you will do anything to get him healed. If something is wrong, you would try anything. And this dad has clearly heard about Jesus. He wouldn't be there if he didn't know a few things about Jesus, and so he came running, hoping. He wasn't certain, but he was really hopeful. Back to Mark 9:21 through 23. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has he been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," asked Jesus. "Everything is possible for one who believes." Everything is possible for one who believes. Everybody say that. I want you to could you put that back up there? Chris, thank you so much, sir. I want everybody to say that last quote there from Jesus. Okay, I'm gonna say it, then I want everybody just to say those words out loud. I want you to feel those words. Everything is possible for one who believes. See, I think the trap that many of us fall into is to thinking that having doubts disqualifies us from believing in Jesus. Clearly, the man had some faith, didn't he? He came with the sole purpose of healing his son. Heck, he even gave the disciples a shot. It feels like this man is teetering, believing things about Jesus and teetering towards believing things in Jesus. And I think that there's something that Jesus sees in this man. So he presses into him with that question. And confirmation is a process of searching for answers to questions. We are not afraid to ask questions and to wrestle with those doubts. Not a lot of pinching and poking, but we wrestle with those questions. We had students across all three of the campuses that were in confirmation this year. We're going to be actually confirming 45 of them here at 84th Street at the 11 o'clock service. And we're confirming, that's great, thank you, yeah. Guys, go ahead and come on up. We had one from South Wyoming who then attended class at Heritage Hill, and we have 6 that are being confirmed with Alex at Heritage Hill right now at the 10 o'clock service. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to invite on stage Mackenzie, Kate, and Justin just to tell us a little bit about their experience in the process this year. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Yeah.
All right.
Should be good. Go ahead.
My name's Mackenzie.
Yeah, hold on. Now we are. Go ahead.
All right, my name's Mackenzie Sturk, and I was able to be one of the mentors for this confirmation process.
My name is Kate Dykehouse. I go to South Christian High School, and I'm a freshman this year.
My name is Justin Golembeski, and I go to Duncan Lake Middle School, and I'm an 8th grader.
All right, good. I'm going to start with you, Justin. Now, Justin, I remember you so clearly because you showed up late. Beth Ann and I, that's like, Chris, he's on stage, quit ripping on him. No, there's a meaning here because Beth Ann and I decided we're not going to let any more kids in, right? We had said the sign-up process is over, and 2 weeks after that, you jumped into class, and you're in my group. I'm like, all right, I don't know this guy. And I'm not saying this just because I've told you this before this, but there was something about you. There was just something about your presence that I wanted you in the class. And so afterwards, I remember saying, hey, where'd you come from? And you showed up to class that day. So I want you to tell everybody why you came that day and then why you kept coming back.
So I first came because I wanted to spend the night at my friend's, and he was in confirmation, and my mom didn't want to pick me up early, so I had to go.
I wanted you all to hear that. It's a holy accident, right? That sometimes these things happen. So don't underestimate those moments where you just kind of show up at a place, you go, why am I here? But what I loved was, what I sensed was there was an openness to you being there. It wasn't like, I've got to be here, why didn't my mom pick me up? I genuinely felt this desire to just soak it up. And so you kept coming back. We didn't scare you away. You kept coming back. And why is that?
I kind of just fell in love with it, and I wanted to learn more about it, and just.
Amen, man. Amen. Thank you. Justin, I'm so glad. I mentored one of the small groups, and so Justin was in my group, so it's just such a pleasure to be with him during these last 6 months. So, Kate, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, so Mackenzie was your mentor.
Yes.
Yep, and I just watched, like, you always met in the cafe there, part of Base Camp, and you were just like this tight group. It was like watching a group of friends hanging out and spending time together. So, Kate, I want to ask you, what does it mean to you personally to believe in Jesus?
Well, throughout the confirmation process, I was praying a lot for like peace. Like going into high school was a new experience. So, and I remember being at one of our retreats, and we received a big blue piece of paper, and we were asked like what we believe in. And I wrote down, I kind of turned it into my own little prayer, and I wrote down that I believe like my future is in God's hands. So like the prepositions again, so.
We didn't set this up. Like, I'm not
yeah.
kidding you. Like, seriously, that wasn't like a softball or anything. You wrote that. I honestly didn't know. I'm not kidding you when I say this. We ran through this morning. I did not know that at that retreat in January, that Kate had written down my life in his hands at that retreat. And when you shared that this morning, like, it hit me. Yeah, and I've just watched that in you, Kate, and I just think that's a beautiful thing for a freshman in high school in a time where it is ridiculously difficult to grow up well. I am so thankful that you have made that commitment, so thank you for that. Yeah. And Mackenzie, it was like every Sunday you just got to hang out with some friends. It felt that way from the outside, so why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for a little bit about my testimony, it was really fun bringing it into the confirmation process, because a year ago, I was actually in these students' shoes. I got sent to YWAM, which stands for Youth of the Mission. So I went to Kona, Hawaii, where I actually did lectures and classes every single day to just fall more in love with Jesus. And before going into that process, I actually had always known about the Lord. I've been a believer my entire life, but I didn't have that relationship with him. And just going through that process personally was so fun. And then I got sent to the nations, where I went to South Africa to serve, and I got the calling of leadership over my life. So when I came back home, confirmation just fell into my lap. So now being on the other end of it and being the mentor in these students' lives has been just a beautiful journey to pour into them through my testimony, but not only that, to watch their testimonies like blossom at such a young age was so fun to watch. And like Chris said, my group was really fortunate to be super close from the start. So it was like hanging out with friends every single Sunday, and I see them as like little sisters to me, and it's fun because I'm also pretty close in age with them too. And yeah, even though there's still a lot of years in between, it's fun running with them. So yeah, church, parents, be proud of these kids. We got to keep mentoring them and keep pushing them, because they're going to go far.
Thanks,
really believe
Mackenzie.
that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And starting your mission work in Hawaii isn't all bad either. I got to be honest. Some of you heard that and you're like, ywam.com, wherever. Yeah, you're checking that out right now. It's just amazing to hear those stories, how God weaves all of that together. And like this father, right? They showed up to confirmation with legitimate questions. I think this father in this story has some legitimate questions. Can Jesus help me? I've heard that he can. He hopes that he can. But what my sense is from the story is that he brought just a little bit of in. He brought just a little bit of faith. And he asked if Jesus could blow it up. And here's what he says in Mark 9:24. It says, immediately the father's boy exclaimed. Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. There it is. There it is. That verse. So many of us think that doubt is the opposite of faith. It is not. Some level of doubt is necessary in order to have faith. I think the opposite of faith is certainty. So many Christians in their search for faith want certainty. And we can find some facts, we can find some information for some of those who think a little bit more like I do, who want some of that quantification, and you can find some of that. But don't let the lie of knowledge get in between you and Jesus Christ. A little bit of in is all it takes. Back to Mark. When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. You deaf and mute spirit, he said, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, he's dead, but Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. His son was healed. Now, Jesus doesn't always show up in our lives in miraculous moments like this, but I promise you, friends, if you bring him just a little bit of faith, he will fill you up. Remember Peter, James, and John, they witnessed something unbelievable like the transfiguration, yet they still had doubts. When Jesus needed them the most, they still all ran away. But when they experienced the cross and the resurrection, their lives totally changed. They went from cowards to ferocious beasts for Christ. We use that phrase in confirmation. So what about you? Do you have questions about Jesus? You're okay. Ask Jesus to help you with your unbelief. Remember the cross. Remember the resurrection. Is your life a little bit messy? Welcome to the family. You're okay. Ups and downs, you're okay. Ask Jesus to help you with your unbelief. Remember the cross. Remember the resurrection. Do you feel like you just have a little bit of in? You're okay. Ask Jesus this week to help you with your unbelief. Remember the cross. Remember the resurrection. Whether you're in elementary school, middle school, high school, or something afterwards, bring them what you have. Even if it's just a little. A whole lot of about doesn't stand a chance against just a little bit of in. A little bit of faith. And you watch. If that's what you bring to Jesus, and if you say to him, Jesus, help me with my unbelief, you watch him add his story to your life. And you watch him fill you up. For 9 weeks, Mark has been telling us that Jesus is the someone that we've been looking for. He's asked us to wrestle with that core question of who is Jesus? And because of the cross and because of the resurrection, friends, I am telling you, Jesus is the only one that we need to believe in. Pray with me. Heavenly Father, we come to you just as we are. Whatever that looks like, Lord, man, there's amazing things about you, but one of them that comes to mind this morning is that no matter what that is, you know it, and yet you aren't running away from us. Whether we have a lot of faith or a little, you're saying, hey, just bring it to me. So Lord, wherever we are, God, I want to offer some words today for whoever needs to hear them. Jesus, we love you. Jesus, we believe in you, that you are the Son of God. Jesus, we know you died. We know you resurrected. Why? Because you love me and you take each and every one of us just the way we are. Jesus, I'm sorry for the things that I've done, but I am so thankful that you did that for me, that you love me, and that you forgive each and every one of us. So Lord, this week, help us with our unbelief. Whatever that looks like, God, meet us there, fill us up, show us the power of your Holy Spirit, and ask all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. And all of God's people said, amen.